Self-awareness is critical to character and leadership development. At least this is what we're told. For a long time, I did not doubt it, but I also did not know what it felt to have one. Eventually, I was able to identify it inside of myself and label it what it always should have been. I realized that I already had a set of mind processes running that just were undocumented for years. All they were missing was a label. Properly labeling them was like finding the API docs for something that I had been using without knowing its name. It let me understand what the thing was, and it sparked the curiosity to get better at it. The spark had a bit of a backstory too. In my late teens, I got very engaged with self-improvement books. They seemed to hold the key to some sort of magic, opening up the conversations, getting better at negotiations, promising a path to becoming the kind of a person who goes on TV and gets called a leader. Most of the content was oversold, but one idea in those books did land with me. You can read other people's intentions on their faces, and you yourself are broadcasting your own intentions involuntarily, whether you mean to or not. Nobody made this observation to me directly. From that spark, I started paying a lot more attention to what it meant to be self-aware. From my wild and colorful tech imagination, over time, I built self-awareness understanding as a stack of variables for how we interact with others, external, with ourselves, internal, and with environment, the context. It is also the process of continuously updating those variables to stay current with the feedback. If you extend that idea, the variable stack is basically a model of the universe that you're maintaining in your head and updating as you go. You become a lot more aware of this model when you move into leadership, because leading forces you to operate the human interfaces from a managing perspective. And the first attempts usually do not work as well as you expect. This is when you discover that the model of the universe in your head is not the same model that is running in other people's heads. I learned this, like many do, by walking into rooms with wrong assumption. I walked into a room of non-technical people assuming they carried the same embedded curiosity that I had about how information flows through technical systems. I wanted them to be part of that process. I was trying to integrate them into it. The frame was, however, non-productive, and I got a lot of pushback. My frustrated reactions arrived in sequence I now recognize. First, it was a surprise. Don't you know this? I thought to myself about my non-technical audience. The second one was passing judgment. Why didn't you spend time learning it? And the third time was a correction. Oh, you have other priorities, and you're good at things other than tech. And finally, the fourth was a genuine curiosity about what other people's priorities actually were and how they made their decisions. The fourth reaction was the most useful one for me. Assessing accurately what was inside other people's head was the key to becoming better at self-awareness. I want to make a little side note. It is about the part that logic first viewers, probably most of you, will want to poke at. So let me get to it directly. My framework models people almost like systems, and yet my whole point is that people are not systems. A mind model is never a perfect representation of how someone actually thinks. It is more of a scaffolding that helps us understand what might be missing in the interaction. A map that shows you the blank regions worth exploring as part of the conversation. Our minds do not operate like machines we are fully familiar with. So every model we'll build of another mind will be incomplete by default. Even if you had a perfect map of how someone's brain functions, you would still be missing the current state, a critical component that lets you comprehend the whole person's mind in the moment. The model is a tool whose main job is to flag where the data is missing. So how do you find the blank regions on purpose? I usually run 4 sets of questions. And as you can see on this diagram, it breaks down into 4 areas about which the questions are. Let's get into them. The high self-awareness need usually shows up around situation or a crisis that needs to be diffused. It shows up in peaceful times too, but honestly, it is not as prioritized then. So the first question is about me. How do I think about this particular situation? And what would I like eventual outcome to be? The second set is my model of them. What do they think about this situation? And what outcome do they want? The third set is their actual model, which I get back by asking those same questions to their face instead of guessing. And the fourth one said, if the model of me in them, how do they think I see the situation? What do they think I want out of it? If I know ahead of time that the meeting will have a discovery nature, like with these 4 questions, I fill in my own answers to the questions above before the conversation, and then ask for clarification in the room. Sometimes I get surprised by my own blind spots in the middle of conversation. When that happens, I try to take a step back and reset the stage by running the 4 questions on myself first and then with the person I'm talking to. The interesting part is the gap between my model of them and their actual model. Once I ask directly. When those two diverge, I do not treat the gap as one side being wrong. The positions are not right or wrong, they're just different. I acknowledge the difference, then come up with additional questions that clarify the position. Once the positions are clear, it becomes easier to build bridges. The goal is not to change the other person's opinion, it is to create mitigating analogies or processes that acknowledge the gap and let both sides keep working. One case made this concrete for me. I had a person who was assigned a technical task, and they were poor at executing it. My model of them indicated that this was a skill or an effort problem. Their actual model, once we talked, was that they did not want to be in tech at all. They wanted a client-facing role. The resistance I was reading as a performance issue was really a person sitting in a wrong seat. The conflict is exactly what brought us to the conversation, and the conversation is what surfaced the real estate. Some of my hardest lessons were not about other people's models at all. They're about how badly I was reading the signals right in front of me. Nature gave me the privilege of 20/15 eyesight. It has obvious benefit, but I did not realize that it came with a side effect. I'm generally a friendly person, so back in my student years, when I recognized someone across the university campus, I would wave and expect a wave back. I did not always get it back, so I concluded that those people were not very fond of me. It took me years to realize the far more likely explanation. They simply could not see me at the distance I could see them. Their eyes were not as focused, and they were probably not thinking about me in the moment and probably something entirely else in their mind. My eyesight was good enough to generate data, but my inference of that data was completely wrong. Then there was an engineer I worked with who would rush past me in the hallway without saying hello, stayed lukewarm at their desk, and would not even acknowledge me if we crossed paths at a store or the gym. Our online conversations, on the other hand, were phenomenal. Frequent chats, emojis, images shared back and forth. I understood that they were simply not comfortable with in-person interaction, and that through a computer, they felt they could communicate properly. People have different interfaces they prefer and excel at. So I stopped nudging the in-person channel and then just work with them online, which is where they were already at their best. Reading the room also means knowing when the room is not yours. Early in my career, I supported financial traders at a desk. At my first company, the culture was first name is open, technical people were invited to the business and technology meetings, and traders and techies were on personal basis. When I moved to another bank, I carried that assumption straight in. I joined a huddle of traders on day 2 discussing a strategy and decided it would be wise to offer my opinion. My contribution was met with silence, and I understood that the input was not useful. What I did not understand was that I was also supposed to leave the group after the comment, and only did so when I was explicitly told so. One company's culture does not transfer to another. That last story is also what made me a lot more conscious about how I come across in conversation. However, I did not want to go to the extreme of stifling my reactions or overreading the input. For example, I cannot fully control my face, and I do not want entirely to. I want my reactions to be authentic and genuine. However, what I do is control my body, and I keep it signaling openness on purpose. My quick judgment or interpretation of another person could be easily wrong. Staying open in my posture keeps me receiving more information about their viewpoint, instead of closing the loop too early on my own guess. There's a real line between useful self-presentation and being inauthentic, and I stay on the right side of it by using the open signal to keep learning, not to hide what I think. One more note on this, because it matters for how you weigh what you see. People's emotional and facial expressions are not always fully controlled, and are not always about a true reflection of how they feel about interacting with you. It takes multiple interactions to understand somebody's character, and I would not weigh the first actions too heavily. Observe and acknowledge your feelings that a first interaction gives you. Do not repress them, but withhold the judgment. Withholding judgment is hard, but it is more useful. Occasionally, it is worth consulting a peer. If I'm talking to someone junior, I might ask exploratory questions like, how does your working relationship with Y? Or what do you notice that they do well? Many science and tech leaders pride themselves on logic over soft skills. And I understand the instinct because I share it. So here's the honest version. None of the communication classes were mandatory in my engineering and science education. Our whole notion of communication ended up based on engineering books rather than on reality of how communication actually works. We're trained to solve engineering problems without considering the human context. And that training teaches us that the human context is not important. In the real world, it is at least half of the outcome, if not more. If I had discovered this awareness early, I would have built a different version of the universe. I would have spent far more time understanding the human interfaces and how much they shape the actual engineering and scientific problems we're trying to solve. The map of the person across from you is never complete, but knowing where it is blank and being willing to ask is most of the job. If you like this content, subscribe below for more.